Hi and welcome to this Cosmia Festival 2021 event brought to you in partnership with Kirklees Libraries. You can find details on the rest of the programme by visiting our website, which is cosmiafestival.co.uk, or by finding us on social media where we're Cosmia Festival basically everywhere. If you want to support the festival further, we have our Ko-Fi link which helps fund future editions like 2022, where we should have a full programme and be back in person, fingers crossed. But for now, stay safe, enjoy the show, and we'll see you very soon.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Cosmia Festival 2021. Today I am joined by Anthea Simmons, who is going to talk to us today about her new book, Burning Sunlight, which I have behind me, which is all about climate change. Hello Anthea, nice to meet you.
Hi there. Hi, thank you very much for inviting me to this. This is great. So yes, I'm here to talk about Burning Sunlight. And it's kind of weird to be talking at a science fiction festival about a subject that unfortunately is not like science fiction anymore. It's science reality, and all those dystopian visions of the future with no water or frozen or burning hot, I'm afraid, are looking increasingly likely to come true unless we take action pretty soon. So I got involved. I decided to write something about young people being involved in climate change activism because I'm a campaigner myself. I campaigned hard for us to stay in the EU and to get a second referendum. Sadly didn't happen. But we often came across, I joined in with a few Fridays for Future demonstrations, and I was just so impressed at the passion and dedication and basically anger of the young people that I was seeing who were out on the streets begging this government to do something to ensure that they have a future. And I talked to some very, very young children indeed who were so aware of what's going on and so informed. And I think old adults tend to underestimate just how much children and young people understand about what's going on in their world and how politically engaged they are. And I decided that I wanted to write something which celebrated that engagement, which might hopefully give inspiration to people who want to know what they can do, and also drew attention to the fact that what we do here in the UK has an impact on people living thousands of miles away. And I deliberately picked, my heroine Zainab comes from Somaliland, which is a country that doesn't officially exist. It's very weird. It's next door to Somalia. It's an independent little democracy. It used to be owned by the British. It's also been owned by the Italians. It's recognised by two cities in the UK because they've got a large Somalilander immigrant population, and that's Cardiff and Leicester. And I just felt it was important to draw attention to them because they were on the list of countries most likely to be affected by rising temperatures and sea levels. Somaliland was fifth when I first started researching this book back in 2019. I was very lucky that I managed to find a contact with somebody who'd been an interpreter, a guy called Ahmed, who lived in Hargeisa, which is the capital of Somaliland. And I had a lot of phone calls with him talking about conditions over there. And basically the situation is that the country's gradually, like so much of the Horn of Africa, gradually turning into desert as the droughts that used to be incredibly infrequent are now every year. I mean, they used to give their droughts names, and now they don't bother because there's a drought every year. So gradually, they were largely nomadic people. They gradually get pushed, funneled closer and closer to the coastline. There are more camps, refugee camps, and people like ActionAid are very active over there, working with women and children in particular. And it's tough. I mean, it's really, really tough. And when they do get rain, because of the droughts, the rains are so enormous and so torrential, that anything that's been growing or hanging on to the dry earth just gets swept away in a torrent. So in my book, my heroine, Zainab, has come over to the UK with her father, who's got a job partly at the university and partly as a consultant for, of all things, a fossil fuel company. And she's pretty angry at being uprooted. Her mother has died tragically, and she's angry about that. And she's angry about how her father doesn't seem to be that, seems to have got over it quite quickly. She moves to a village in Devon and goes to school there, and she meets Lucas, who's a very quiet, thoughtful boy, very much in love with the landscape, spends a lot of time up on the moor, and they strike up a friendship. And they're a great team, really, because he's quiet and thoughtful and takes time to come to decisions and everything. She's very impulsive and very dynamic and would probably crash around smashing stuff up, if she was given half a chance. And he sort of counterbalances her, and together they start a Fridays for Future campaign. And then what happens in the story is that they gradually uncover a story of greenwashing. And for those of you who don't know what greenwashing is, it's what I'm afraid a lot of companies do, especially in the oil sector, is that they put out ads and they put out campaigns and things that seem to show that they're being incredibly green, and they're doing something. They point to some project, and it's there was a very good program on the other day with Joe Lycett explaining how distraction techniques work, and they basically say, don't look at us drilling over here, look at this, or look at this lovely thing we're doing over here with the trees, and look at us planting trees and how helpful we are. And they're just trying to make people feel, oh, actually they're not bad, they're doing their best. And they announce big sums of money that are being spent on projects, and people immediately think, wow, that's a lot of money, not realizing that actually it's a drop in the ocean compared with what they're spending on drilling and fracking somewhere else. So my two uncover a great weird twist in which what's happening right now at the Science Museum and at various demonstrations ahead of COP26. Sorry, that cat's jumping on the back. Sorry, cat's making a some of the protests that I dreamt of happening in this book are actually happening now. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm not going to take credit for the fact that anybody's copying what was in here, but it is uncanny actually how, I finished this book in 2020, and it came out earlier this year in April 2021. There's a long lead time before books actually come out. And there's a lot of production stuff that has to go in after you finish writing it. But it's really weird. It's like I'm reading about my happening in real life. It's very, very strange. Anyway, I thought what I'd do is I'd read a bit. If you think that's a good idea, Hannah, shall I read a bit?
Yes, shall I put you on the screen by yourself and hop off for a bit? Okay, thank you. Right, so this is quite early on in the book, and it's when Zainab and Lucas and some friends have got together to organise their first Friday for Future protest. So they haven't told anybody, they haven't told their parents or anything, and they're basically skiving off school. On Friday morning, when we got off the bus and I walked in the opposite direction from school and towards the town hall, this is Zainab speaking, by the way. It's written in Zainab's voice and Lucas's voice. I switched between the two, so you get a different perspective. I felt power and rage run through me like an electrical storm over the desert. How many would follow us? How many had the courage? We should have done posters and told more people, well, maybe. But if anyone else had been really interested, they would have come to the meeting. They'd had a meeting to discuss how they were going to run this event. Lucas had brought a tin of greasy black, brown and green camo paint that he'd stolen / borrowed from his father. We marked ourselves like warriors. A couple of people stopped to watch as Aoife and Jack unfolded the banner which they'd made from an old sheet, just as they'd promised. It said, Fridays for Future, School Strike for the Climate, and had the Extinction Rebellion symbol. They'd done well. It was bold and strong and said exactly what Greta said it should. Greta Thunberg, that is, of course. No one could miss it. Sophie Ann crossed the street to get a good photo. Rudy Harris ran to catch up with us. Behind him was a little kid. How had she got here? Sorry, said my sister Kitty. I couldn't stop her. How had the driver not seen her get on the bus? A 6-year-old kid. It wasn't a day for babies, and I wasn't a babysitter. She stared at me without blinking, and then she tore off her jacket. She was wearing a yellow T-shirt that she'd written on, Don't steal my life, it said in red glitter pen. Nice.
You better not cry, want snacks, or go pee-pee all the time, I said. I'm not going to be your mama. She narrowed her eyes and set her jaw. I want to fight for Greta, for me. She pulled off her beanie. Her blonde hair was in 2 straight plaits. She stared at me again, blue eyes as deep as the skies back home. Okay, cool kid. I grabbed the camo paint from Lucas and stuck 2 fingers in the black, swiping 2 stripes over Kitty's pink cheeks. I gave her my fiercest stare. She didn't even twitch. I see you, my sister, I said, and held up my hand for a high five. She could hit hard. She had more guts than any of them, that was clear. Izzy? No, she was walking fast towards school. She looked back at us for a moment. I could tell she was ashamed. Chicken, I shouted. She just walked faster and faster and disappeared around the corner. Go then, we don't need you, I shouted. Lucas turned away in embarrassment. He needed to toughen up for sure. There's no way the war could be won if we just played nice all the time. We tied the banner to a stone tub that stood below the notice board outside the town hall's main door. I read the bits of paper pinned up behind the glass. Salsa classes, learn Spanish, yoga, art lessons. Nothing about anything that mattered. The house was on fire and people were dancing and drawing as if they had no idea what was coming. The twins appeared. I'd forgotten about them. They'd made a flag too, copying Lucas's planet design, which he'd showed them at the meeting. It was pretty cool. The shops were beginning to open. People stared at us but said nothing, just carried on as if we were normal, as if it was normal for there to be kids covered in camouflage paint and slogans out on the street and not in school. I could feel the anger and excitement rising in my throat. I wanted to shout and wake these people up. Maybe Aoife could see that I needed noise. She pulled out a big flat disc covered in animal hide and a stick like a wooden dog bone from her rucksack. I immediately felt homesick. I wished I'd had my Yume drum, a beautiful thing with tooled leather and taut skin, decorated with orange tassels. Aoife's looked plain, almost ugly. But wow, she could play that thing. The bone beater twisted in her hands as she hit the drum with alternate ends, and it was loud, and it made my heart beat faster. Kitty started whooping and jumping around. She looked so wild, so free, not like a white English doll with her blonde plaits, but like a spirit or a demon. Soon we all became like Kitty. We caught her joy like a disease. Even my anger became joyful. We were there, we were alive, we were protesting. We danced until we were warm, stamping our feet and singing. People gonna rise like water, gonna shut this system down. Hear the voice of your great-granddaughter saying, climate justice now. It felt good, so good. A couple of people tooted their horns as they drove by. Yeah, pro the planet, but driving diesels. Still, the toots felt good too. Every now and then I shouted, give us back our future. My voice bounced off the walls of the narrow street and made shoppers turn their heads to stare. We kept singing and dancing. If I stopped for a moment, the others stopped too. Without me, they'd do nothing, say nothing. I danced more wildly, Kitty following me like a shadow as I whirled and circled the others. I remembered dancing with Mama and the women and girls at one of the camps. I could almost hear her laughter, her joy. I could see the faces of the children, Idil, Asha, Fatima. I wished I was with them now. And then the magic was broken by an old man shouting. Go to the next chapter from Lucas. This is the Lucas's perspective. What do you think you're doing? Stop that racket. Take that banner down. The man's voice was aggressive, and he started to tug at the banner as if he wanted to tear it up. Then he let go of it in disgust and frustration and turned to Zainab. He stood too close to her, dangerously close, for him, not her. I put my hand on her arm to try to stop her saying or doing anything, but before she had even opened her mouth, Aoife had pushed her aside and confronted the man. What are we doing? Your job, she said. Now go away, old man. Your house is on fire. Go piss on it. I'll call the police is what I'll do. Make this unholy racket, leaping about like savages. You're all playing truant, the whole lot of you. He looked as if he might explode with fury. Zainab stepped back in front of Aoife and looked the angry man straight in the eye. We're fighting for your future too, Zainab said. Why don't you care what happens to the planet? The man started sputtering about stuff and nonsense and how in his day we'd have been given 6 of the best, whatever that meant. Just then a car pulled up by the side of the road and a pretty woman with blonde hair wound down the window. You having a go at these kids? She challenged the man. Leave them alone. She got out of the car and Kitty immediately flew to her side, wrapping her arms around her legs, whooping with excitement and shouting, Mummy, Mummy. The man tut-tutted and scurried away, all the fight gone out of him, muttering about bad parents and kids these days. Well, he was a charmer, wasn't he? Hi everyone, I'm Marie Harris, Kit and Rudy's mum. In this case, this little leg grabber hadn't already made that obvious. Sorry, in case this little leg grabber hadn't already made that obvious. How's it going? I couldn't help wishing my mum was like Rudy's. She didn't seem at all bothered about Rudy and Kitty not being at school. All she said to Rudy was to let her know next time that he was taking Kitty off somewhere without telling her, so that she could let Kitty's school know. They'd rung up in a panic after some other kid had seen Kitty getting on the big school bus. Don't take me home, pleaded Kitty. Don't take me to school. I won't go. This is Fridays for Future. Her mum smiled. Not going to, Kits. You carry right on. Proud of you. She turned to Zainab and me. Is this your idea? What's your strategy? Got the press lined up? Got any leaflets or anything to give people? Something they can do, an action they can take? Or are you just having a bit of fun? I could see Zainab's temper beginning to flare, but before she could say anything, Mrs. Harris carried on. Only I can call the local paper if you want. A friend of mine's a journalist there and he'll come straight on over. Better have your story ready though. What's your message? For a split second, Zainab looked blank, and then an expression of frustration passed across her face. We hadn't thought about the papers at all. Even worse, we hadn't really thought about what effect we wanted to have. Did that mean it was a failure? Or maybe, Mrs. Harris was watching Zainab's face carefully, maybe you'd be better keeping your powder dry. Zainab looked baffled. Sorry? You know, wait until you've got a really big turnout before getting the press involved. You don't want them to say it was a damp squib, do you? Mind you, that's not a bad crowd you've mustered. We'd been so focused on Mr. Angry that we hadn't noticed that Izzy and about a dozen other people were now crowding the pavement. Izzy smiled shyly. I know you thought I'd bailed, she said, but not everyone takes the bus, you know. Anyway, I got these people to come too. I'm filming, said Sophie Ann. Want to say something to the camera, Zainab? I would have been terrified if I'd been asked to speak, but Zainab wasn't fazed at all. Today is our first protest, and it's quite small, but it will grow and grow. We've been silent for too long. It's time to speak out. We want climate justice, and we want it now. Join us. Sophie Ann stuck her thumb up. Great, that'll go viral. Wow, said Kitty, you're just like Greta, only a different colour. Mrs. Harris hugged her. Every colour, every country, maybe even every city or town has their own Greta kits. Looks like we've got ours. But then Mrs. Baldwin arrived. She's the headmistress. And we all knew instantly that we were in deep doo-doo. Okay, everyone. Mrs. Baldwin clapped her hands to get our attention. Back to school straight away, please. All of you mini Rambos, stay here for a moment. Yes, you with the face paint, especially you, Aoife Coleman, and you, Jack Harrow. They're older children. What a surprise. And Sophie Ann, you seem to have forgotten the events of last year. How very convenient. Sophie Ann had tried to organise Fridays for Future event before, and Mrs. Baldwin had said no, under no circumstances. Mrs. Harris stepped forward to say something, but Mrs. Baldwin cut her off. You'll be wanting to get your daughter back to school as soon as possible, Mrs. Harris, I'm sure. For a moment, I thought Kitty's mum was going to tell her where to get off, but she just smiled and said, they're good kids, you know. They're fighting for the right cause. Well, it may well be the right cause, but this is not the right way. Mrs. Baldwin looked as if she was really finding it hard to be polite to Mrs. Harris. I was beginning to feel a bit sick. Dad would be beyond angry if I got suspended, and Mum would be really disappointed in me, which was worse. Zainab stepped forward, eyes blazing in her eagle way. It wasn't Eva's idea. Really? Said Mrs. Baldwin. Well, we need a little talk, you and I. I'll see you at noon in my office. Now, back to school, all of you, and for goodness sake, get that stuff off your faces. You look like something out of Lord of the Flies. So that was our first school strike for climate. Could have gone better. So, and it does get better, but they've got quite a battle on with their headmistress, who's not very keen on them being away from school and drawing attention to what's going on. And I just wanted to, I don't know how many of you here have ever been on a protest, but I just wanted to show you something. I edit a paper, an online paper called West Country Bylines, and we cover a lot of climate change issues. And right now we're doing a countdown to COP26 and covering a festival called Copness in Totnes nearby. But recently I went to a demonstration at Devon County Hall where they're trying to persuade the Devon Council to divest, to basically sell all their oil company shares, all their fossil fuel shares. And I thought I'd just share the screen with you and just show you the sort of thing we're talking about if you haven't been on one of these before.
get justice now.
Oh, sorry. Let me show that again. And then I also wanted to show you another film, which is a little bit like what happened. So here's a still. This is a very dramatic sort of art, almost like an art installation protest that took place on the steps of County Hall, where these girls in I suppose in suits had what looked like oil poured over them by people in suits representing oil companies. And then it went to this. Everybody was so quiet while this happened. It was very, very powerful. And then I don't know, these the Red Rebels appear in my book, right at the end, in the sort of the big protest at the end where the big drama sort of happens. And again, I don't know if any of you have ever seen these people, but they are amazing. They're completely silent, and they're basically just mourning the planet. And here's an
interview about why you've done this. Why have you been prepared to be covered in this?
Ultimately, we've got to fight for our planet, and nothing's happening about it. And we really need action. I think our generation has been quite frightened and awoke by the fact that we're the last to have a shot at this, and we'll literally do anything to make them hear us.
Thank you. It was incredibly powerful. Get an interview about why
I keep doing that, don't I? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now. So I suppose the book is my attempt to make a contribution to raising awareness about what's going on and about how young people can get involved. So Hannah, can we take some questions? You're muted.
Sorry, I keep doing that. So you're obviously very passionate about climate change. So I wondered if you had any advice for how other people can try and protect the planet and do their bit.
Well, obviously, we've all got to do the obvious things like recycling, reusing. I mean, consumption is the thing that we have to cut. We don't have to have new stuff all the time. It's about making things last or finding them new homes so they've got somewhere, so they get used and don't get dumped and thrown away. And I think one of the key things is we've got to keep pressure on our politicians. And we speak to, we're always addressing the public through our articles, and we get a lot of response about, I write to my MP and they don't respond, or they don't take any notice. And I think what we've seen, especially in the last few days, I don't know if you've been following the sewage scandal story about about the government voting to allow water companies to basically dump sewage in our waterways and on our beaches. And there was absolute outcry on social media. I mean, it went really, really nuts. And it just showed that when people get behind something and get really angry and passionate about something and get onto social media and write to their MPs, I mean, people were writing and tweeting and contacting their MPs just all day yesterday. And the pressure just got too much for them. So they eventually semi-capitulated. I mean, there's further to go, but it showed that people power can actually work when governments are doing things that cannot be supported. And I think that's what I think what I fear most, I think what all campaigners fear most is apathy, is people just going, well, what can you do? You know, nobody's going to take any notice. Nothing's going to change. I can't make a difference. And maybe you on your own aren't going to make a difference. But when there are two of you, you make twice as much difference. When there are four of you, it's 4 times as much. You know, it's just about getting together and amplifying your voice. So to young people, I would say, try and join a Fridays for Future group. A lot of schools have got them, or start one. Join Friends of the Earth or Greenpeace or one of the other bodies. There'll almost certainly be a climate action network in your area that you can get involved in. I'm sure the library runs events on climate awareness, and we'll have lots of literature. So read about it. Keep writing to your local paper. Make sure it's in the news all the time, and it's not allowed. They're not allowed to drop it. What you're going to hear at COP, I'm sure, is a lot of what Greta described as blah, blah, blah. There will be a lot of talk and there won't be a lot of action, because the sort of action we need is so radical, actually, that people just can't contemplate it. But we are going to have to do some pretty drastic things. And it's going to mean, it's exciting too. It means investing in sustainable agriculture, sustainable energy production. It means that we need to give up our cars. We need to use public transport, which means there needs to be a massive investment in infrastructure and everything. It is huge, and it is a big ask. But without wanting to frighten and depress everybody, when you look at what the ramifications are if we don't do this, you know, I worry for, you know, I worry for future generations. So, sorry.
Yeah,
Anyway.
it's quite a big topic.
It's a big thing. Thanks for saving me, Hannah, from being silly and emotional. But
You're fine.
perhaps I better have another question.
Would you write another book about climate change? Do you think you'd do a sequel to this one?
Well, a lot of people have asked if they want to know what they do next. I mean, they do something pretty drastic and dramatic in this. I think when I wrote it, as I say, I think people thought it was a bit. They thought, "Wow, could kids really do that?" And I think they could. And I think that Zainab and Lucas are going to go on to do more and have a bigger impact. So I would quite like to write a sequel to this. Now, this is where we get to the hard business of publishing in this country and everywhere, actually. I mean, books have actually had a bit of a revival, and through COVID, book buying online and sales of Audible books, etc., has actually gone up quite a lot. But there's no two ways about it. If you want a book to sell, and if you want Waterstones to have it high up on their pile, or any of the other bookshops, you've actually got to get round and do author signings and get into schools and everything. And when I did, I just get my last book. Hang on. Oh my goodness, I should have had this ready. Lightning Mary, which is about Mary Anning. When that came out, I did masses of school visits and went to bookshops and libraries, etc. Because of COVID, of course, I haven't been able to do any of that. And it definitely makes a big difference if people meet you and see you around, and you can sign copies and things. So selling it's been a tougher year for all publishers and all writers, and also library. You know, we're eternally grateful to libraries, really, because a lot of people don't realize that when people borrow our books, we do get a little bit of money for every time a book is borrowed. And once a year in February, you get a little email from the public lending right body who say, "Oh, you know, we're going to pay you X." And sometimes I think my best has been about £800 or something, where you just know that a lot of people have borrowed your book, and that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But of course, you guys have had to be closed, and
Yeah.
for a long time. So that's had an impact on us as well. So publishers have got to think, is it going to sell enough to do it? Because it's expensive business. And for example, I mean, on this is really technical, but on the cover of this book, it's got a raised, shiny, to look like the oil dripping down. And that's an expensive process for a cover. So they did,
Yeah.
and the badges are raised and everything. So they put a lot of money into it, and they're great. I mean, Anderson are fantastic. They're really, really good publishers. It's sold in a German company that does English readers for people learning English in Germany. I've bought a lot of copies, which is really nice. So it's going there. But really, I mean, I'm quite surprised because I think this is the year for this book. I mean, with COP26 and the story in it, which could almost be a newspaper report of what's going on right now, it is kind of right. It's the zeitgeist book, really. I mean, I'm keen to push it because it's mine, but I think it's an important book to read.
Yeah.
Because I like to think that it, and I've been told this by young people who've read it, that they feel, yeah, I could do that. I could get involved with that. They can identify with the characters. They like the characters, and they want to be like them, and I think, Zainab's a bit out there. She's quite difficult to be like because she's so single-minded about it. But Lucas, who's the quiet boy who comes out of his shell, or Aoife, who's the rebel who's on the borderlines of being thrown out of school all the time and finds something to really get stuck into. They're all interesting, I hope, believable characters. And there's somebody you're going to identify with when you read it, and hopefully will just make you feel, yeah, I'm going to do something before it's too late. Because apathy, just shrugging, doesn't get us anywhere, does it?
No.
So
We've got another question that's come in from Ambreen, and she's asked, have you ever been involved in demonstrations yourself? It's so lovely to see an adult take climate change as seriously as us younger ones do.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, I've been involved in quite a few demonstrations. And obviously that's another thing. Protest has been seriously curtailed because of COVID. I can't believe that most of us wouldn't have been out on the streets every weekend, if it was possible to do so. And, without getting overly political, it's worrying to see a government that's bringing in measures to try and curb peaceful protests, because I think a lot of us feel that our voices aren't heard, and they're not much heard in the media. And we have a mass media that is either climate, on the climate denial spectrum, or the play it down spectrum, or actively in an attempt at so-called balance we'll have a climate scientist who actually knows what's going on, and then have somebody who knows pretty much nothing but has got an opinion on the other side, saying that it's all nonsense and made up and a fiction and all the rest of it. And I think that we just want to be out there telling the truth. This is that we've got to really face up to it, and we've got to make some drastic changes in our lives. And I think the other thing is that because it's, we haven't seen the impact in this country bar flood. Obviously flooding's been very, very serious, and we've had heat waves where people have died as a consequence. But we're not seeing the kind of dreadful forest fires or the sort of flooding that takes a whole town away. But they're beginning to see it in places in Europe. And I think we have to realize that there will be millions of people on this planet who are stuck somewhere where it is impossible to live. And what are they going to do? They're going to need to find somewhere else. And we're going to have to face up to the challenge of reconfiguring the way the countries are carved up, so that people can find somewhere safe to be. I mean, we're not in this country. We don't have to think, unless you live in some of the coastal towns are going to go. Bits of London could be underwater. Bits of London's already been underwater. But we're not at that point that the people who live in Zainab's country are, where you simply cannot live the way you used to live. You are going to have to move, and you may have to leave your continent to stay alive. And one of the things I talked to Ahmed about was that he said there is almost not a single family in Somaliland who has not lost a son or a brother or a father who has tried to get over to Europe and been drowned, or has never come back, or has, because they're desperate, they're desperate to get a foothold somewhere safe so that the rest of the family can follow. And that's the sort of thing that's going to be happening on a mass scale like nothing we've seen before if we don't act. So yeah, so I've been on demos, and I'll be on them again.
Another one from Amber saying, why do you think so many adults are apathetic? Is that how you pronounce it?
Apathetic, I think they mean. Yes, apathetic, yeah.
Despite having children and knowing their children will be living in the world they ruin. Why are people putting the present comfort over the future?
It's a very, very good question. And I think it's a combination of there's a kind of comfort in not knowing, isn't there? And I think for a lot of people, they actually don't want to know. It's one of the things that I get personally is that, I've lost friends who said, Anthea, I just can't be with you because you're just on it all the time. And I just, it just wears me down. And I don't want to be made to feel bad. And I think that's a danger from somebody like me, is that I'm, I put people off, and that's there's one thing about being passionate, but if it's so extreme that people feel overwhelmed, then that's not good. But at the other end, the apathy I do find incredibly distressing to deal with, because I think, why don't you care? But I think we're seeing apathy for so many things. Why we've got millions of kids who go to school hungry and people don't really care. We've had tens of thousands of people die through COVID, and people are like, oh, well, that's death, tens of thousands, we don't really care. And now we're facing this really, really, really significant issue. And I think while our lives in the UK go on being relatively okay, and we don't get burnt down in a forest fire, and we don't get, the high street disappearing under a flood, unless you're unlucky in parts of Cumbria, and there are parts all over the UK which have been flooded badly. People just don't really, they think, oh, it'll never won't happen to us. And maybe it's a sense of powerlessness. Maybe, this is this whole, I hope it's all right, Hannah. This is getting very political, but it is political. Politics are in everything. And when you have a political system, which means that 70% of people's votes don't really count for anything because they don't have any impact. Until we have a system, I think, where there are a lot of Greens in Parliament, and there are a lot of people with different views and people who want to take action on climate sitting in our seats of power, I think no wonder people feel a bit powerless. And I think that's where a lot of the apathy comes from. So they think, well, I can't do anything, so actually I don't want to know, I kind of just make it go away. And I think that's really worrying. And I think the great thing, though, is that we've got a generation coming up that's more politically aware and mobilized and activated, than they've been for generations, probably. And but again, like, Greta stands up and says, why should it be us? Why should it be the kids that are doing this? She's going to the most powerful people in the country, in the world, and saying to them, for goodness sake, you guys have got to do something, not us. It's not for us, we're children. And she's quite right. And I think it's encouraging to see people like Joe Biden and, some other world leaders who take it very, very seriously and are actually trying to take action to change behaviors and to decarbonize their economies. But then on the other hand, you have governments like ours and like Australia, where they're going in completely the opposite direction. Australia is a real basket case. It's almost entirely funded by fossil fuels, and they don't want to give them up, because that means giving up money, and people think money's the whole point of it. And I I think we need to look at some different models like New Zealand, where they're saying quality of life, your children's health, is more important. Children having a future, children being fed properly, children learning and fulfilling their potential is much more important than how much money you've got in the bank, how many holidays. I mean, it was just that there's been a budget today, and in it, Sunak's cut taxes on internal flights ahead of COP26. I mean, that's the last thing you want people getting on planes. Get them on trains. It's crazy. So, anyway, perhaps I should get off my soapbox, talk more about the book. I mean, maybe we'll have questions about what it's like writing a book. And do you think it'd be
yeah, I did have a question about what inspired you to write the book. I feel like you've already covered that in your introduction, but if you have anything else, just wondered if you had any other inspirations for the book.
Well, I think when I looked at what was out there, there was sort of fiction about a dystopian world where it's all gone wrong, basically. So there's plenty of sort of futuristic stuff about when the apocalypse has happened and we're all struggling to live as best we can. And there are quite a lot of books about, sort of picture books about, what you can do to help with recycling and stuff like that. But there wasn't anything about the passion of individuals to get stuck in. People like Greta, I mean, she is an extraordinary character, obviously, but there are people like her all over the world. And I think one of the things I also want to do is to give a voice to people from Africa, particularly, because there was a very famous picture. There was a conference in Geneva, and they had climate change activists from right around the world, and there was an American and a Dane and a Swede and obviously Greta and a German and then a girl from Ghana and Vanessa Nakate. And so there were these 4 white kids with their blonde hair and blue eyes, and there was Vanessa on the end, a woman of color, young woman of color. And in the images that were shared across the mainstream media, she was cut off. And to me, that just said it all. It's like, this is an issue for white kids, and we don't really care about what happens in Africa, and we don't really want to know, and we're literally cutting her out of the picture. And so part of my motivation was not to write just about white kids. And I think the other thing is that there's been a perception that it's a very kind of middle class thing, that it's affluent parents who run an electric car and subscribe to The Guardian, and it's their kids that are on these marches. And it's just not true. It's not, I mean, and it's wrong to stereotype those children too, but it's wrong to not realize that young people all over the globe are waking up to the worry that they don't have a future, and they're prepared to fight for it. So I wanted to talk about the personal cost and the personal challenge and the personal joy that comes from getting stuck in. And I spoke to a number of young activists, and they said and they were talking too about how it's sometimes tough and frustrating because you can't motivate people. And then you get people like Mrs. Baldwin, the teacher at school, who keeps saying to Zainab, stop frightening people. You're making people scared. Would you just shut up? And why do you have to be so disruptive? And why do you have to? And Zainab's thinking, because the time clock's ticking, we don't have time to mess around and be nice about it. So that's what I wanted to write about. People who really care and get off their backsides and do something.
Yeah, it's a really great book. We've got about 10 minutes left before we need to start ending the session. If anyone has any other questions, just send them into the chat and we'll ask Anthea. We do have another one from Amber.
Mm-hmm.
She put, do you think by the time the younger generation is in a place to actually do something, it will be too late?
That's a very, very good question. I think what the younger generation have to focus on is getting my generation and the one below me to do something. And so I think, I mean, just to give you an example, there's a character in this book, the Kitty character, who's the little kid, was actually inspired by a friend's daughter. And just to give you this little story, to give you an angle on it, one day she's 5. She was 5 at the time. She was going her school was going on a little trip to a farm. And so her mum said, right, Kitty, you've got to have your wellies. And she put her wellies in a plastic bag. And Kitty went, why have you got that? And the mother said, what do you mean, kids? What's wrong? Why have we got a plastic bag? And so her mother said, oh, I'm really sorry, Kitty, but you need to keep your watch. She said, I'm not carrying a plastic bag, and we must never, ever have a plastic bag in the house. She's 5, she absolutely got it. And her mum said to me, do you shame me? I just really, from that moment, I just thought, my daughter cares more about this than I, my daughter's telling me, Mum, get with it, just do something. Don't be, every time you go shopping, go without a bag and then have to have another plastic bag. I mean, it's a little while ago when I first heard that story, I suppose about 4 years ago. And I hope Kitty's read the book now, and she'll probably think, oh gosh, was I like that when I was 5? But that's where the change is going. So even if Kitty can't do anything, she can make her mum do something. So I think that's where the hope is. That lots and lots of children can make their parents and their grandparents do something, and they can say and there's nothing to stop children writing to the MPs. I mean, yes, officially they only take notice of actual voting constituents, but getting petitions together, asking their parents to keep writing, keeping the pressure on, they can make a difference. And will it be too late? Well, we're at a tipping point, aren't we? I think it's impossible to say. I think we've got to hope for the best and probably prepare for the worst, but let's hope for the best.
We've got a nice comment from Amber, who says that she's added your book to her list, and it's amazing to see you write about an important issue through the lens of marginalised communities and showcasing the work people of colour are also involved in.
Thank you very much. That's a lovely, lovely tribute. And when you've read it, if you feel like writing a review somewhere like that, that'd be fantastic. Thank you very much. That's the book. I mean, books. What do books matter if people don't read them? I mean, that's the point. Mm-hmm. It's the reader that completes the whole process. And we as writers, we have this wonderful, quite challenging job of bringing a world alive and creating something that somebody can escape into and emerge changed a bit. I mean, I think books should change you. I think you should. I really like to think you finish reading a book and you think, wow. Wow, because you enjoyed it, but also wow, because you think, yeah, I'm gonna do, especially with this, I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna do something now.
Well, it's been great to have you on the show, Anthea.
Well, thank you very much for joining us
for the festival. And I hope everyone's
really enjoyed it.
I hope everyone's really enjoying the festival so far. And you can follow Anthea on Twitter. The handle's just there. And if you want to find out more about the Cosmia Festival and what we have coming up, you can visit the website here. And I also wanted to mention the discount that we have. So if you buy this book, you'll get an amazing discount from the Read Home Firth shop. So to qualify, just let them know that you attended this event. And the next festival event that we have coming up is tomorrow, and that will be with Lauren James, who's talking about the book The Quiet at the End of the World. So that'll be at 3 p.m. So I think That's everything. Is there anything else you wanted to mention, Anthea?
I just want to say, so yeah, support your local bookshop, definitely.
Right.
I know we all give money to Amazon, don't we? But it's much better to support your local bookshop and support your local
Yeah.
library. Keep your local library open. That's absolutely essential. Yeah. Anyway, Kirklees Library, you do a great job. So good on you.
Thank you.
Keep going. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. See you
Bye-bye.
later. Bye.
Bye.